All right, let's jump into our deep dive today. We're heading over to Afghanistan, to Paktia province.
So
I've got this document here, and it's just called Paktia.pdf. Very simple, very straightforward.
straight to the point.
But the name is really deceiving because this thing is just overflowing with history.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that really stood out to me was how much Paktia has been at the center of so much resistance for just, it seems like forever.
Yeah, it's true. Paktia is often overlooked, but you're absolutely right. Its strategic location and the people there, the resilience of the people, has really shaped its history for thousands of years.
Wow.
It's a place that has constantly pushed back against empires and invaders, and in doing so, really forged this unique identity.
Okay, so before we get into this whole, unconquerable aspect of it,
Yeah.
can we just sort of get our bearings, where exactly is Paktia and why has it been so important throughout history?
Paktia is located in southeastern Afghanistan,
Okay.
and it borders a lot of provinces, Paktika, Khost, Logar, and Ghazni provinces.
Yeah.
But here's the key. It also shares a border with Pakistan's Waziristan region.
Ah, okay.
And that is why it has been this crossroads of cultures and conflicts for centuries.
So it's not just tucked away in the mountains, it's right on the edge of
Yeah.
things. And the name Paktia itself, the document was saying that has ancient roots too.
It does. The name Paktia is believed to be linked to the ancient Aryan tribes, and specifically the Paktin tribe.
Mm.
And they were a major ethnic group in ancient Afghanistan. So we're talking about a lineage that goes back thousands of years, even before the time of Alexander the Great.
Wait, before Alexander the Great? Okay, you're blowing my mind a little bit.
Right.
How far back are we really talking here? Because that's a long time ago.
Oh, we're going way back.
Okay.
Paktia was a cradle of civilization. Think Gandhara civilization, Zoroastrianism, the whole works.
Wow.
The Aryans settled there over 2,000 years before Christ,
Wow.
and Paktia was actually one of their original settlements.
Wow.
So while the Roman Empire was still just a twinkle in history's eye, Paktia was already thriving.
That is seriously ancient. So did all the big empires from the history books, the ones we all know. Did they all rule over Paktia at some point?
Oh, absolutely. You had the Achaemenid Empire, so the Persians under Darius the Great.
Okay, yeah.
And then came the Kushans, followed by the Hephthalites.
So it was prime real estate.
Oh, yeah.
But they didn't just give up. They didn't just let people roll in and take over.
Never. They had this incredible spirit of resistance.
Okay, so I'm starting to see a theme here a little bit.
Absolutely.
This unconquerable thing is starting to make a little more sense.
It's all coming together.
But one thing that's really fascinating to me is that even Alexander the Great, who conquered most of the known world,
Right.
faced resistance in Paktia.
He did.
What happened there?
So picture this. You're Alexander the Great. You've swept through Persia. You're feeling pretty unstoppable.
Right.
And then you hit Paktia, and the terrain is very mountainous, so it's perfect for those defensive maneuvers.
All right.
And the people, well, they're fiercely independent. So Alexander's army met with stiff resistance.
I can imagine.
They were harassed with these guerrilla tactics. Their supply lines were disrupted. He ultimately did take the region, but it definitely wasn't a walk in the park.
So a taste of things to come.
Exactly.
This was not the last time that Paktia would be a difficult place to conquer.
I'm curious, how did the arrival of Islam change things in Paktia?
So when Muslim Arabs arrived in Afghanistan, they brought Islam with them, and Paktia gradually transitioned to being a predominantly Muslim region. But it's important to note this wasn't a sudden or violent upheaval. It was actually a gradual process of cultural exchange and integration.
Interesting. Okay, so it wasn't just this immediate conquest. It was more like a blending.
Yeah.
What happened as we move into the medieval period? Were there more empires vying for control over Paktia?
Oh, there were plenty.
Chuckles.
The Ghaznavid and Ghurid empires both held sway over Paktia, and the region actually played a key role in their expansion.
Oh, wow.
You've probably heard of Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni?
Yeah. Well, he used Paktia as a base for his campaigns into India. So Paktia was strategically vital, not just for its resources, but for controlling trade and projecting power.
So it wasn't just about holding territory.
No,
it was
right.
about advantage.
Exactly.
Did the Mughal Empire ever manage to control Paktia?
The Mughals did control large parts of Afghanistan.
Yeah,
But Paktia, as you can imagine, presented a challenge.
of course.
They faced constant resistance from the local Pashtun tribes, who were incredibly protective of their independence and their autonomy.
Right.
So the Mughals never really fully subdued Paktia.
I'm sensing a pattern here.
You should be.
It seems like this resistance is deeply ingrained in their identity.
It absolutely is, and that spirit of resistance would continue to shape Paktia's destiny. It even played a crucial role in the formation of modern Afghanistan.
Oh, wow.
When Ahmad Shah Durrani was unifying the country, the warriors of Paktia were some of his most steadfast allies.
So they weren't just fighting against empires, they were actively building a nation.
Exactly.
Not just reacting, but shaping their own future.
They had skin in the game, and that's what makes Paktia's story so compelling, that fighting spirit, that refusal to be subjugated. It carried them through the centuries right into the 19th century when a new empire came knocking.
The British Empire.
Exactly. They had their hands in a lot of places.
They did.
So what happened when they set their sights on Afghanistan and inevitably on Paktia?
Well, I think I know what happened. Paktia did not roll out the welcome mat.
You would be correct.
Douglas.
The Pashtun tribes, with their deep knowledge of the terrain and those guerrilla tactics that they had perfected, made life very difficult for the British.
Oh, yeah.
They launched raids, ambushes, disrupted supply lines. They were relentless.
Yeah.
They were not going to give up.
So even the mighty British Empire couldn't tame Paktia.
They couldn't. It's almost like they had this superpower, this ability to resist any force that tried to control them.
That's a really good point.
But as we move into the 20th century, the challenges facing Paktia, well, they take on a whole new global dimension. And this is where things get really interesting.
You're talking about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. I
I
can't even imagine what that must have been like for the people of Paktia.
It was a pivotal moment in Paktia's history.
Right.
And in many ways, it was a continuation of that long tradition of resistance.
Wow.
So Paktia became a major center for the Mujahideen,
Right.
the Afghan fighters who resisted the Soviet occupation.
So they go from fighting the British Empire to facing down a superpower.
They did. It's incredible.
What made Paktia such a focal point for the resistance?
Well, remember those mountains and valleys that we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
They became this natural fortress for the Mujahideen. They knew the terrain intimately. They had the support of the local population, and they were incredibly determined to defend their homeland. Paktia became a symbol of Afghan resistance.
Wow.
A real thorn in the side of that Soviet military machine.
That's amazing. They were literally fighting for their survival, for their way of life.
They were, and their resistance, along with the efforts of other Mujahideen fighters across Afghanistan, really played a significant role in the Soviet Union's eventual withdrawal.
Oh, wow.
So it's a true David and Goliath story playing out on a global stage, and Paktia was right at the heart of it.
Okay, this deep dive is already blowing my
The
mind.
chuckles.
I'm seeing Paktia in a whole new light.
Good.
It's not just a place on the map. It's this symbol of resilience.
Yeah,
It's like human spirit's ability to just resist oppression.
absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface.
Really.
There's so much more to uncover about Paktia, from its role in more recent events to its vibrant culture to the challenges that it faces today.
Well, I am definitely hooked. Paktia has gone from this relatively unknown province to this place that is really capturing my imagination. I can't wait to learn more.
Well, then let's dive into the next chapter of Paktia's story.
All right.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Let's go. You know, as we're talking about Paktia and the spirit of resistance, it really makes you realize how much we often simplify entire countries and cultures.
Yeah.
Afghanistan is often in the news, but it's usually about conflict. And, you know, it's easy to forget that there's this rich history there and these incredibly resilient people.
It's true. And Paktia's story is a good reminder that there's always more beneath the surface.
Absolutely.
We tend to gravitate toward the simple narratives. But places like Paktia really force us to grapple with the complexity, with those layers of history and culture that really shape a people's identity.
I think it's worth spending a little more time on Paktia's role during the Soviet invasion.
Okay? Yeah.
You touched on it a little earlier,
Yeah.
but there's a lot more to unpack there.
Yeah, absolutely. From what I read in this Paktia.pdf document, it wasn't just that they resisted, it was that were this key factor in how that whole conflict played out.
Yeah, you have to remember, this was the Cold War, so the whole world was watching.
Right.
And Paktia became this symbol of Afghan resistance against this superpower.
Right. And the Mujahideen fighters, they weren't just brave, they were strategic. They used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage.
It was like a David and Goliath, but in the mountains.
It was a perfect analogy, and just like David, they managed to overcome some incredible odds. The Soviets had superior firepower technology, but the Mujahideen, they had the home field advantage. They knew those mountains and valleys like the back of their hands,
Right.
and they used it to their advantage.
That's not smart.
They used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, ambushes. It was really a classic case of asymmetric warfare.
So how did that resistance in Paktia actually affect the bigger picture of the war? I mean, did it really change the outcome?
Well, a lot of experts believe that it was a major factor in the Soviet Union's eventual withdrawal.
Wow.
The Mujahideen's tenacity and their ability to really inflict these losses on the Soviets, it really sapped their morale, it drained their resources, it became a war of attrition that they just couldn't win. So they weren't just defending their homes, they were contributing to this larger movement that ultimately, brought down a superpower.
It's pretty huge.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the importance of understanding those local dynamics.
Right.
Because Paktia's resistance, rooted in its history and its culture and geography, had global repercussions.
That's incredible. It makes you think about all of the untold stories, all those individual acts of courage and sacrifice that must have taken place during that time.
Absolutely. History is made up of those personal stories, those moments of bravery and resilience. And that brings us to another important aspect of Paktia, one that is often overshadowed by conflict.
Yeah.
And that is its rich and vibrant culture.
Right. We can't just focus on the wars and the battles. We have to talk about the landscapes and the ancient monuments and the culture that is thriving there today.
Absolutely. It's a place deeply rooted in tradition with this strong sense of community, a connection to the land that goes back generations. And you mentioned the historical fortresses earlier.
Yeah.
Can you imagine these structures that have stood for centuries?
Wow.
Perched on these strategic hilltops, silent witnesses to the ebb and flow of history?
Okay, you're painting quite a picture here. Tell me more about these fortresses. What makes them so special?
They're not just military outposts, they're really embodiments of Paktia's history.
Mm-hmm.
So take, for example, the Sultan Fortress near Gardez. It's this imposing structure that was built to defend the region, and it's seen countless battles, empires rising and falling, and each stone tells a story. It's a testament to Paktia's enduring spirit.
Wow, I bet those walls could talk. What about other cultural gems? What else stands out to you?
Well, the document mentioned the Ahmadabad ancient fort. It's thought to date back to the Mughal era.
Oh, wow.
So imagine exploring those ancient walls, feeling the weight of history all around you.
Yeah.
And then you have these monuments dating back to the Gandhara period, before the arrival of Islam. Buddhism flourished in this region, leaving behind these incredible stupas and sculpture.
Like stepping back in time. But I imagine that centuries of conflict probably haven't been kind to a lot of these ancient sites.
Unfortunately, you're right, many have been damaged or destroyed, but those that remain are really these windows into this rich tapestry of Paktia's past.
Yeah.
And nestled among those peaks and valleys are these lush, green valleys, oases of life where agriculture has flourished for centuries. It's a land of contrast, those rugged mountains, those serene valleys, those ancient ruins and modern villages, all coexisting in this harmonious blend.
This is making me want to book a flight. It's incredible how those traditions and this way of life have survived through so much change and upheaval.
Yes.
We've talked a little bit about the Pashtun people and their code of honor, Pashtunwali.
Right.
I feel like that really shapes the culture in Paktia.
Absolutely. It's more than just a set of rules. It's really a way of life woven into the fabric of Paktia's society.
Yeah.
It emphasizes things like hospitality, bravery, loyalty to your tribe, and justice. So imagine a society where your word is your bond, where guests are treated with the utmost respect and generosity regardless of their background.
That's so different from how we often think about this part of the world.
Right.
It's fascinating how those values have endured.
And don't forget the music and dance.
Right.
The Atan, which is this traditional Pashtun dance, is this incredible display of energy and rhythm, often performed at weddings and celebrations.
Cool.
It's these traditions that are living proof of Paktia's cultural resilience.
Okay, I'm officially adding Paktia to my travel bucket list. It's amazing how much we can learn from different cultures, different ways of life. Paktia's story is a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt and innovate and preserve its identity.
I couldn't agree more. It makes you realize that.
Hold on a second. Before we move on, I want to make sure our listeners have a chance to really absorb everything we've covered.
Oh, that's a great idea. Sometimes we get so caught up in the flow of the conversation that we forget to pause and reflect.
Exactly. So let's just take a moment. Paktia is this province with a history that spans millennia.
Yeah.
It's been at the crossroads of empires, a stronghold of resistance, and a cradle of culture.
It's true.
It's where ancient monuments tell stories of forgotten civilizations, where towering fortresses stand guard over these fertile valleys, and where the spirit of the Pashtun people just endures.
It's a place that challenges our assumptions and really expands our understanding of the world and makes us want to learn more.
Well said. Okay, I think we're ready to wait. I'm getting a message from our producer.
Uh-oh.
It seems like we've run out of time for part 2.
Oh, man. But we were just getting to the good part.
I know.
No.
But don't worry, everyone. We'll be back with part 3 very soon, and you won't want to miss it. We'll be diving into Paktia's more recent history and what the future might hold for this extraordinary province.
Stay tuned.
So welcome back to our deep dives into Paktia province.
It's good to be back. I'm ready to continue our exploration.
We left off last time talking about Paktia's resilience and how rich its culture is. But obviously, recent history in Afghanistan has been, tumultuous is probably an understatement.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. The U.S. withdrawal in 2021 sent shockwaves through the entire country, and Paktia was certainly not immune to those changes.
Yeah, exactly. And with Paktia's history of resistance, especially towards the Taliban, I was really curious to see what the Paktia.pdf document said about how things have been since the withdrawal.
Yeah, well, initially there was a lot of concern about how Paktia would fare under Taliban rule.
I can imagine.
You know, you have to remember many of the Mujahideen fighters who resisted the Soviets were also opposed to the Taliban.
Oh, right. It wasn't just like a unified front or anything.
Exactly. So there was a sense of anxiety and uncertainty. But what's interesting is that despite those concerns, Paktia has remained relatively stable since the Taliban takeover.
That's not what I was expecting, considering their history. I would have thought there would be more open conflict.
It is surprising, and that stability, especially in a region known for its volatility, it really speaks volumes about the dynamics at play.
Okay, so what's the secret to Paktia's stability? Is it just that the Taliban have softened their stance, or?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. It seems like the Taliban, in the second time governing, have adopted a more pragmatic approach. You know, they seem to have learned from the past, and they realize they need to work with the local communities to maintain order.
So less about ideology and more about just keeping things running smoothly.
Yeah, precisely. And in Paktia specifically, they've allowed the existing tribal structures to remain largely intact, and this has really helped to preserve a sense of continuity and keep things relatively calm.
That makes sense. Paktia has always had this really strong tradition of local governance and tribal authority. So it sounds like the Taliban realized that disrupting those systems would only lead to more chaos.
Exactly. They seem to be prioritizing the consolidation of power and establishing a stable government above all else.
But stability doesn't necessarily mean prosperity.
What's the economic situation like in Paktia these days?
That's the big question, isn't it? And Paktia, like much of Afghanistan, is facing some pretty serious economic challenges. Decades of conflict have taken their toll, and the withdrawal of international aid has only made things tougher.
So how are people coping? What are they doing to make ends meet?
Well, Paktia has always been this region of self-reliance with agriculture as the backbone of their economy. And the people are resourceful. They're adapting to the new realities as best they can trade with neighboring. Pakistan continues, although there are certainly obstacles.
So they're finding ways to persevere, to keep going despite the difficulties.
They are, but it's important to acknowledge that the situation remains fragile. Paktia, like the rest of Afghanistan, is at a crossroads.
Yeah. So what do you think the future holds for Paktia? Is there any sense of, what direction things might head in?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, it's hard to say with any certainty. A lot depends on if the Taliban can govern effectively and whether they can address those economic challenges, and of course, whether the international community steps up and engages with Afghanistan in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. Without international support, it's going to be incredibly difficult for the country, including Paktia, to achieve that lasting stability and a path to prosperity.
So the future's uncertain, but I have a feeling that Paktia and its people will find a way forward.
I tend to agree. Paktia's history is a testament to human endurance and adaptability and overcoming seemingly impossible odds. So I have no doubt that the people of Paktia will continue to write their own story and shape their own destiny.
This deep dive into Paktia has been so eye-opening. I've gone from knowing next to nothing about this province to being completely fascinated by it.
It's been my pleasure exploring this region with you. Paktia's story is a reminder that history isn't just dates and battles. It's about the resilience of people and their culture, their ability to thrive even in the most difficult circumstances.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface, and there's so much more to learn and discover about this unique and extraordinary place.
To our listeners, I encourage you to keep exploring and to delve deeper into Paktia's history and culture.
Paktia's story, like every story, deserves to be told and heard and remembered.
It's a reminder that history is a living, breathing tapestry woven from countless individual threads.
Threads of resilience and courage and the enduring power of the human spirit.
Keep those stories alive.
Keep learning.
Keep exploring.
And keep diving deep.
Until next time.